All right, let's take you through some additional concepts that will help you make your presentations and your in-home meetings super effective. Whenever you have a meeting, for example, maybe an in-home meeting or even a larger presentation, maybe it's a hotel meeting, you want to ensure that there is somebody or some buddies who are there greeting people as they come in. Somebody knocks on a door to an in-home meeting. Somebody's there to answer the door and welcome that person in. Or in a hotel type of a situation, maybe you have 2 or 3 people there at the registration desk who are then talking to people. Maybe there's somebody there to help people find the individual who invited them there, help people find seats. And the reason that you want to do this is, again, you want to make sure everybody feels comfortable because the guest is thinking 2 things. Number 1, am I interested? Do I feel comfortable? Is this a place that I want to be? And then, can I do this? So you want to have somebody there who's going to interact with them and make them feel at home. The worst thing in the world is somebody shows up to a meeting and in home, maybe their friend isn't there that invited them, or maybe their friend's occupied. That happens a lot. And so you as the guest walk in and nobody's there. You feel like a fish out of water. Maybe you didn't even want to be there in the first place. You have no idea what's going on. You don't know any of these people. And that can be a really uncomfortable situation. So this idea of taking people in as soon as they hit that door is a really important principle.
The success of any presentation actually comes in the invite. Before you even get to the presentation, that edifying. And so when you invite your people to listen, here's what you want to do. On top of inviting them, you want to tee up the advisor, whoever that advisor is going to be. Why? Because like we talked about, people want to listen to you because of you, but they don't want to listen to you because they don't respect you yet. And so what you're going to do is you're going to tee up that person. Now, when you get to the meeting, like Seth mentioned, we're going to have a greeter there at the front door. And the greeter's role is to invite the new person. So as you knock on the door or come to the meeting, the greeter's going to say, hi, hey, Mike, my name is Mark, and who are you here to see? And Mike might say, well, I'm here to see Mark. And guess what the greeter's going to do? The greeter's going to then tee up Mark. Why? Because Mike and Mark are just friends. And so what the greeter's going to do is just say, hey, you're so lucky to be able to work with Mark. I don't know if you know, but Mark just started a couple of weeks ago. But you know what? He's a rising star in this business. He's been building his business, enrolled a bunch of people in the first couple of days of this business, and he's on his way to be one of the rising stars of the business. And guess what happens? Guess what happened to Mike? Mike feels like, wow, I didn't know that about Mark. I mean, he just feels lucky to have Mark. And then the greeter's going to take Mike, and we're going to walk over to Seth Mulder, who is the guest. And I'm going to say something like, hey, this is Seth Mulder. We're so lucky to have Seth Mulder. He's one of the top leaders in this company. And let me see if I can introduce you to him. And I'm going to say, hey, Seth, this is Mike, and it's Mark's guest. And guess what Seth's going to do? Seth's going to tee up Mark. And Seth, what would you say?
I'd say, Mike, wow, you're a good friend of Mark. How do you know him and get to know him a little? And then I would say, wow, you're lucky to be working with Mark. He's definitely one of the rising stars in this company. He's done a lot in the few short weeks that he's been here, and it's just been a pleasure to work with him.
How do you think Mike is feeling now?
He's feeling like, is this the Mark that I know? He hasn't even heard anything, but the value just skyrocketed. The stock is up.
And guess what Mike's thinking? Wow, I want them to talk about me too. Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, people, by the time the presentation is actually performed, the buying decision is already done.
If you do it right.
If you do it right. Because they want to be with people. They want to be around positive people. They love that feeling. And just subconsciously, they're going to be thinking, wow, this is pretty amazing.
Now, that's a great example of what should happen at a meeting. Let's talk about sometimes what does happen that maybe isn't as effective. Let's say that there is a greeter, or you have a number of distributors, people who are involved in the business, all waiting for their guests, kind of congregating around the door, waiting for your guests, instead of mingling with everybody else. Well, I've got to wait for my guest. No. But anyway, instead of mingling and working with other people and edifying other people, even if they're not in your team, that's an important principle. I mean, that is so important. They're huddling by the door. And
Seth, we're all a team, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we have this scenario where there are a number of distributors maybe waiting around for their guests, not really doing anything, all talking to each other instead of talking to other people's guests. And a new guest walks into the room or knocks on the door and introduces themselves. Yeah, my name's Dan. I'm here. And you say, well, so who invited you? Well, Sylvia invited me. And you think, well, Sylvia's not in my group. So you automatically kind of disconnect yourself from that person. That person is no longer a person, they're an object. And worse than an object, they're an object that's not in your group. They're not in your royalty bonus. And so you just kind of back off and say, oh, well, cool, welcome. And you just kind of let them go. That's a missed opportunity. Another situation is, let's say that you happen to be the advisor, a guest presenter. And one of the common problems is the guest presenter is backstage getting everything ready or hobnobbing with somebody else, and they're not out there mingling. I can tell you, I traveled the world with somebody who's been very, very successful in this industry, and I was always so taken at how interactive this individual, he traveled around the world, country after country after country as the advisor, the guest speaker. Everybody wanted to meet him, and he made sure that everybody could meet him because it wasn't about him. It was always about them.
That's a key point. When you tee someone up, it's not really about, making me feel good, making me be that almighty person. But what's really important is that you key the person up so that the new person will actually listen and hear the information differently. When they're hearing it from the advisor, from the professional, from the expert, somehow people listen and hear differently. And that's the whole key, is to help them listen to the information and make the best decision for themselves.
So after somebody is properly greeted and invited in and introduced to one or two people, and maybe you show them your seat, try not to ditch people. Again, put yourself in the C role. If you're the client and you're being invited somewhere, do you want to be alone? Well, you might want to be alone, but you showed up to the meeting, so you don't have a choice. You need to make sure that you can keep them engaged. Invite them to meet another team member.
So let's say, Seth, that I was sitting down. I'm a team member. I'm sitting there waiting for the presentation. And so you come up to me and you introduce Mike to me.
Absolutely. I just want to make another connection. Mike might not even be my guest. Now, if he is, that's great. But if he's not, if I don't have somebody to work with, I need to grab a body. The guests, all of the B's, and frankly the A's, need to make sure that the experience is positive for the C's. Positive experiences come by talking to other people, by making connections. And you might introduce my guest to somebody else who happens to have the same background. We see this happening all of the time. And all of a sudden they hit it off. And because of the integrity in our company, we never have to worry about your guests being enrolled by somebody else, because that doesn't happen in our company. We don't allow that to happen. That's just part of the code of ethics of being a member of the team. But it's so powerful when those connections are made, because they feel like, wow, there are other people just like me. And if they're interested, then I ought to be interested as well.
So once the introductions are made and you met the guest presenter, then I'm going to take Mike and I'm going to walk him to the seats, and maybe Joe was sitting there. So I'm going to say, hey, Joe, this is Mike, and Mike is Mark's guest. And then Joe's going to jump in, and what is Joe going to say?
Joe's going to edify Mark.
Great. And guess what happens? And he's going to sit there and he's going to talk with Mike until the presentation starts. And again, it's how people feel that's most important. And if we do this right, the buying decision is made before the presentation even starts. The presentation is just the icing on the cake.
So that takes us up to the presentation starting. A couple of notes, maybe concepts that we should discuss. There's the tendency sometimes to want to wait for all of the guests to arrive before we start the presentation. We don't want them to miss out on anything. What are your thoughts about that, Mark?
If the presentation starts at 7 o'clock, start at 7 o'clock. We need to be on time. Remember, it's all about them. It's all about honoring the new person. It's all about honoring their time. And so if we say we're going to start at 7, let's start at 7. If we say we're going to end at 8, let's end at 8. So let's keep the presentation. Let's honor their time. And if we develop this culture of starting on time, then guess what happens? We'll be on time.
What kind of message does it send to, say, a client, the guest, C? What does it say to them? What kind of message do they get about our company or about our opportunity, about us as people, when we are going to put our business on hold and we're not going to start that presentation until they show up? So now it's 7:10 or 7:15 or 7:20.
Well, Seth, if I was sitting in that audience, I would think, what is going on? I'm not important. Someone else is more important.
Absolutely. If we're going to put the business on hold for one person, then we're going to put the business on hold for anybody. We don't wait. We start on time, do what we say we're going to do, and that will literally create a culture of discipline.
And trust.
Absolutely.
Now, We just talked about how to do a meeting. You can even apply this to a three-way call, a conference call. Just use the same principles, adapt it to a three-way call, just as we talked about in a live presentation.
So let's continue how to effectively host a presentation. Where should you sit as a distributor? Where should guests be? What should happen? What we know is most effective is if distributors, those who are involved in the business, the professionals, if we're interspersed throughout the venue, whether that's in the home or whether it's in a hotel meeting. The worst thing in the world to have all of the guests at front, or as commonly happens, scattered throughout the meeting, and the individuals in the business in the back talking, having conversations, texting, emailing, phones ringing, walking out of the room. What kind of message does that send, Mark? Have you ever seen that happen?
I felt horrible. I remember sitting in some of those rooms there, and all I could think of is, wow, it's more important for people to talk among themselves, and the information is not as important. And so it just distracts. So like Seth was saying, you want to have your team members, your distributors, dispersed throughout the seating area. You don't want to have all the distributors in the front or all the distributors in the back or all of the new people in the front. You want distributors dispersed, and you want the new people to sit next to the distributors. And what you want to do is you want to be, as a distributor, you want to be attentive. You want to be sitting on the edge of your chair. And when the presenter asks a question, you want to raise your hand. If you ask a yes or no question, you want to nod. Because guess what happens? It's all peer pressure. It's subconscious peer pressure. And so if you're nodding your head, guess what happens to the person next to you? They start nodding their head. Or if you raise your hand, guess what happens? They raise their hand. So what you do in that presentation is just as important as the information being disseminated. So sit there, have a lot of energy. If you're falling asleep, guess what happens? The person next to you is going to fall asleep. Or that person next to you might be thinking, the information must not be that important. So no matter how many times you've heard or seen the presentation, you want to be sitting at the edge of your seat. You want to be listening. You want to be positive. When they ask a question, raise your hand, answer the questions. Because when that happens, guess what? When the presenter asks a question, you're nodding your head, they're going to nod their head all the way to signing that check.
Again, this business is 90% psychology and 10% what you do about it. And when you increase that positive psychology, when you increase the energy by interacting, you literally can create energy in a room. Have any of us been in a presentation where you felt that energy? I mean, just things are popping. I mean, it has a life of its own. And yet many of us, if not all of us, we've been in the opposite situation where there is no greeter, there's no music, and everybody's out there for themselves. It's a dead meeting. The distributors stay in the back. They're texting. They're taking phone calls. The 3 guests or the 5 guests or the 7 guests are all herded as if they're specimens on the operating table. We're all looking at them. And the presenter asks a question. The distributors aren't paying attention. The guests don't answer the questions. And so the presenters asking questions get no reaction. And that literally feeds into the success or the unsuccess of what we can do as we share the story.
And if that was you sitting there in the audience and it was dead, there was no energy, would you want to join that business?
Not at all. It's not fun.
Not fun. Remember rule 4? Have fun. So you want that energy. You want people to be involved. And the whole presentation really starts from the time they knock on the door, walk into that presentation, until they leave. That's the real presentation.
Perhaps another concept that we should talk about is the role of B, the role of the bridge. I've had a number of these experiences where the B may want to say something. This can happen on a 3-way call. This can happen in an ABC, which is like a 3-person meeting, right? Coffee shop or whatever, an in-home. It can happen at large group meetings as well. But bees need to behave themselves. What am I talking about here, Mark?
Well, remember it's all about teeing up that A. So let's say I'm sitting there. I'm a B. And the A is there, the advisor, whoever's the guest speaker for that meeting. And they're going through the presentation. And if I keep interrupting them, or even just once, guess what happens? I cut the A's credibility. They just lost that respect. They just lost their credibility. And remember, it's not about you or me, it's about the new person. And so the whole purpose of the roles A, B, and C is to help the new person, the C, make the best decision for themselves, to change their lives, to have more financial freedom, to have more time freedom.
What about the situation, Mark, where the A maybe is giving the presentation and leaves out some information? They leave out maybe a significant piece, an insignificant piece, whatever. You feel like that piece needs to be in there, and you're a B. What do?
Nothing. You just sit there, listen, shake your head, and smile. Okay? Because guess what? If you correct the advisor, what happens? They just lost all credibility. And so at the end, when they actually go to enroll the person, the credibility is shot because all of a sudden the B becomes the A. So if they forget something, just be quiet. Just remember that story about the gentleman that was sitting in there and he went and gave this presentation and he's talking about a compensation plan, how you can make money. And he's talking about there's 10 different ways to make money. And he's talking about the percentage and you can make 100% 5 levels deep. And and you just sit there, right? If you interrupt him, guess what happens? He loses all credibility. So you just sit there smiling because guess what? People don't remember 80% of what they hear anyway. All they remember is how they feel when they leave. So just sit there, listen, be happy, be energetic, listen, smile, nod, and you can correct the person after anyway. It doesn't matter, but don't do it doing the presentation because they lose all credibility.
It is key for Bs to behave themselves.
And in that story, everyone enrolled in that business.
Anyway.
Despite getting it wrong. Doesn't matter.
I think the justice here is that Bs who tend to interrupt their advisors have the same curse happen to them because they teach that in their organization, right? They teach, again, a culture. They teach a culture that if I have something on my mind, it's all right for me to say it. It's not about A. It's not about B. It's about C. And when we understand that, then we can act and follow these principles. A's will do their job. B's will do their job. And then the C's will do what 70 to 80% of the C's that we're finding get involved in some way when they go through this proper process.
So ego, do you want to be right or do you want to make money?